Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Tim. How are you? There's no test today, Tim, so we don't have to worry about having extra points. So. Thanks, everybody, for coming. As you know, today is the separate SOAR, and we are building on the rain gauge information that Jake walked through last week. And we're going to build on that to start using it, applying it into how you can comply with the separate SOAR requirements. You know, we know there's many. And I want to apologize last week for some of the internet problems. Jake, Jake's great mind. He said to me yesterday, you think we could plug into the internet at this building? I said, yeah, it's right below where you sit. I only worked here for 30 years, you know. So we think we have the internet issues for the future for live demonstrations and everything worked out. So that shows you where my brain is sometimes. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to the new genius on my team, Jake.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so as David mentioned, this presentation is going to build off what we talked about at 3WG last week, where we reviewed the precipitation tools that are available to us and you know, how to get the data, different types of data, things like that. So today we're going to talk about, you know, how can we utilize that data for these phase 2 consent orders and those requirements. Skip to the next slide. Okay, so for our outline, we are going to revisit the phase 2 COA timeline for the separate sanitary sewer tasks. Look at the tools we have available, the Three Rivers rainfall tool that's on MDS or, you know, on Three Rivers website, the View VIP tool, which is a more advanced type tool. And then as far as utilization goes, you know, we can use it to characterize single events. We're going to need to utilize the precipitation data when we're doing QA/QC for flow data. The EPA SOAP program for storm deconstructions, for SWIM H&H models. And then that leads to, you know, looking at 10% reduction projects, characterizing SSOs, and then working on your SSO elimination plans. And then also even for the QP tool that we've presented previously and was used a lot for the baseline due diligence efforts. Then we'll go into the SSO ad hoc committees and any questions from there. I'm trying to keep this more at a high level still, and then next month, the idea is to kind of dig into some specific examples for these programs. So this is our timeline for the SSS orders. Same graphic we've shown in the past. You can see 2023 bracketed out. And what I did this time was highlight tasks that I felt are these tasks are going to utilize precipitation data. So if you're working on any of these tasks, you will be utilizing the Three Rivers tool or the View tool to download precipitation data. So for paragraph 7 communities, we're flow monitoring right now. We're doing field surveys to update our models. That data is going to require precip data. If you're looking at paragraph 8 and you want to cost share for projects, there's a good chance precipitation data is going to come into play there. You know, looking at 5% projects, 10% projects, updating the H&H model and going to the alternatives analysis. So anything dealing with flow monitoring, modeling, alternatives analysis, you need precip for. So this is the Three Rivers tool. This is kind of the first bubble that's going to pop up when you go to the tool online. If you're unfamiliar and you didn't see the presentation from the 3WG last week, it's available on MDS and on YouTube, so please like and subscribe there. Three Rivers has maintained this network of 33 rain gauges, through a partnership with View, Alcasan, DataWise. Network's been up since 2001. It's a complex network of, how these companies intertwine and get us our final product, but we have data stretching back that far. At the top here is a link, if you need the actual link, and if you don't want to go through the Three Rivers website. But once you click that link, this is what you'll see. This is a map-based tool. So that's your main interface there on the left. We're offering different types of data. Real-time rainfall data, whether that's from an actual rain gauge itself or from a pixel, from the radars, or from the radar data. Historical rain gauge data, which would be QA/QC data at each one of these rain gauge locations, and then the calibrated radar rainfall data, or gauge adjusted radar rainfall. If you see GARR, that's what that means. Here are the different buckets you're gonna get data in using this tool. Both real-time data you can get from the pixel and the gauge itself, as I had said, that's provisional use data. This is not QA/QC, not adjusted, anything like that. So if you're obtaining real-time data, you need to be cautious how you're using it. Historical rain gauge data is usually up, I'd say, within 30 days. I know I reported last week that historical rain gauge data was available through the end of December. I haven't checked on that since. And then calibrated radar rainfall data is a little bit more post-processing there. So that's, I'd say, it's 30 to 60 days. I know we have available up to the end of November currently. On the tool, when you log in and the pop-up comes up, there's a lot of good information there. And you might find yourself refreshing to go back and actually get to this pop-up so you can answer some of the questions you may have on just the overview of the tool, methods on how the data is obtained, how do you get the data. There's demonstrations, a prior presentation done by Christian, I think in 2021 when this beta was first developed, and you could probably even link the presentation from last week. But I wanted to bring up this screen specifically and just highlight some technical information on how we get the data. So we have our rain gauges themselves, actual instruments out in the field that collect and measure the rainfall at that specific location. So that's it's an accurate measure of rainfall, but it's limited to that exact spot. On the flip side, we have radar systems. This is often, what you see in the weather reports. It's not measuring rainfall directly, but it's detecting the intensity of microwave energy reflected by the raindrops, called reflectivity. And then you use a mathematical formula to convert using radar system to get rainfall estimates for basically 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer pixels throughout Allegheny County. So when we're looking at the GARR, or the calibrated radar rainfall, that is combining those two measurements to get our most accurate depiction of the precip that fell over Allegheny County. And really what it ends up at the end of the day is basically 2,313 different rain gauges that we can use. Looking into the tool, where you're selecting dates and how you download the data. You want to select your time period, whether it's for real-time, historical, or calibrated radar rainfall. Below in the box, the red, I'm not sure if you can see if I'm clicking there or The box in the bottom right is where you're selecting your gauges or your pixels. In this example here, we're selecting just one rain gauge to download. Yes.
Gauge for reference. Whatever is closest proximity.
So we're talking for modeling alternatives. Sorry, the question, if we're looking at multi-municipal efforts, and so we have a few different municipalities looking at a similar project or a similar area in a model, do we need to make sure they're all coordinating using the same rainfall data? And I would say yes. But I think it goes a little bit more in depth there as to, are you using a whole sewer shed worth of precipitation data, or hey, we did an analysis, we're just going to go from this gauge itself. Maybe there's one gauge smack dab in the middle everybody feels comfortable with, and that's what you want to use. But I think it depends on the size of the sewer shed and things like that. And yeah, certainly you'll need to coordinate with the modelers and make sure everybody's in agreement on the precip data, because that will have an effect for sure.
That's the key part of this. Julie is saying, if you're not using the same, if somebody's using a different period of time, it could be different effects, right?
Yeah, and I guess the way the process would work is you're updating the model first, and then everybody should be using the same model. So it's really almost one entity, with support from others, but you're all working on an updated model. Then you move to alternatives analysis, and then you're running design storms on top of an updated, calibrated model.
Maybe if I can just add a little bit, like you said, I think if it's doing the same analysis, you want to be using the same rainfall. But there may be, say you're doing post-construction at the upstream part of the watershed, maybe using a different rain gauge than someone post-construction on a project part of the or do separate analyses. But then when you roll it back into the model, you want to make sure that you're using a consistent methodology, so everyone's coming up with the same answer.
That's Sam.
I mean, had so many presentations on municipal collaboration. I think the ideal scenario would be, as Jake said, one model, one consultant. So everybody uses the same standard. It's not just the rainfall which can give you different results. If every municipality does their own model, you can their own engineer. There are simulation options, time is that. Some default parameters, they are not the same or are changed by the modelers. Then everybody will not be comparing apples to apples. So if the ideal scenario that there's one engineer including all the municipalities in that POC, then the next best scenario would be that they get together a lot and discuss their assumptions and approaches to modeling.
So it was reported that they couldn't really hear Sam online, so mind giving a summary?
Really, you want to have one, and I said entity, basically one consultant is the one putting the model together, and everybody's utilizing that same model for alternatives analysis. Depending on how many municipalities are involved or engineering firms, you want to get together and discuss what assumptions were made to develop your updated model. What precip did you use? What flow monitoring data? Where did you make changes to the submodel that you received from Three Rivers? So really it comes down that it's one entity that's developed this model, and you're all utilizing the same model. It's very important.
No, I think I heard in there too, that you gotta make sure that everybody's reviewing it and talking about all the changes, right? So what you're saying, if one's putting it together, that doesn't mean kind of what we're doing others. People have to have input. You know, community A has to say, this is what we have done, and we think this is, you know, changes that will affect it. Community B says that we haven't done anything, which I'm just hypothetically, and community C has done these projects. So that the coordinating person has all the data. And I think that's what goes back to what we're saying, when we release models, we get information back. We need to know, like, what did you change in that? So that people can say, well, I didn't do that at the end. So there has to be that consistent, kind of what you're saying. Maybe like, you know, another spreadsheet that makes sure that shows, did that get put into the final model? Did my project get put in? Is that summarizing what you're?
That'll be important.
I'll come closer, for the people who lived through the feasibility study. Oh, that was kind of, the approach was that a lot of times defaulted to the municipality or technical folks who were the most downstream of that. And they sort of took on the coordination task of not only making sure using the black models and their so convening the meetings and even in some cases, planning reports. Now, it just so happened a lot of folks ended up, you know, they say support back then, but that's kind of like behind whoever was the most downstream, coordinated the upstream folks, gave office at one point of contact, and then gave those everybody chiming in what the model was like, what the salt was like, and then they what the best approaches are.
I hope they were able to hear Tony.
Yeah.
I'm standing closer to microphone.
That's why you got.
That's why. But, I mean, just think about this. We gave you POC models. We didn't give you municipal models. And it was for, you know, not just that it would be more convenient and less work for us. You know, another idea behind that was we encourage you to collaborate with several municipalities in a POC and have one POC level model. Think about this scenario. If the most upstream municipality does some model changes, maybe they calibrate their model just for their most upstream part in the POC. Next downstream municipality does not know anything about the improvements made in the most upstream part of the POC, then you are going to be dealing with different flows than the most upstream municipality. Likewise, the most downstream municipality, you know, if they don't know what happened to the change in flows in the two upstream municipalities, they'll be dealing with different flows. So your projects are all about the flows, you know, and flow rates and their volumes. So that is another reason to either collaborate a lot or just use the same model.
And we've had a lot of really good success with that in a couple of the POCs where, you know, one engineering, if the community will say, okay, I'll take the lead, but you have to give me your data from your community. And then when I put it in, then they go back and say, okay, this is what we did. Make sure it reflects what it's doing. And I think our goal with this was to start building this better model system. So that, okay, now we got a new great baseline. And then when we do the projects, we'll have this new simulated model. And then after we do the flow, post-flow, we'll be able to correct that model. So then when we start into the next set of orders, we have this better whole modeling system. What Sam said, instead of stopping at a POC, it'll go into the system. And I know Jake's been working on a few of those, so that's how I understand it from a dummy perspective.
Two good points that come out of that is one is we have this model update ad hoc committee. I think that's going to be a big part of that. And you got to realize that any updates you're making to this model, there's going to be some kind of system that helps us bring that all together and send it back to Alcosan. And then another is if you're in one of these multi-municipal partnerships and maybe you haven't talked to your neighbor yet and you're not sure how to start, I think like the feasibility studies are a good starting point. How that was all put together might give you a path moving forward.
So I think all this has been a great discussion, but what I feel is that since the municipalities have been provided all these submodels, I think it would make sense that either Three Rivers or Alcosan or a collaboration of them should send out some guidelines as to how these submodels need to be used. I think I heard all the right answers in the discussion, but I think a fixed set of guidelines is going to be helpful so that there is a consistent approach being employed by all the parties in the play.
So the audio is now coming out of this device.
We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and was that called?
Yeah.
So I think I understood what you're saying, but basically we need some kind of guidance that tells everybody how they should be utilizing these models. And maybe some guidelines about what can be changed and what not.
I think the key is, you know, and again, you mentioned the subgroup, I think that's a critical place for that to be developed. Is to identify kind of, as we're making changes to the model, how do we document that? Is there some guidance as to how to modify the models for various things? Not that there's strict requirements, but these are guidelines, maybe how to represent certain types of source control projects. May be useful to have in there to help standardize that. So as it's coming in, it's easier to review. There's a consistent methodology being used. So I think overall that was the overarching comment there.
And I think we'll probably get into some of that next month when we're looking at some specific examples and using these programs. Maybe that'll get that guidance started.
And Tony referenced feasibility studies. I don't think documentation was at the highest level that it could have been. It's out the same several years ago, documentation for the models within our consulting group has increased dramatically. It is now an expected part. You know, and Sam's on that committee. Sure, Sam will be able to bring up, you know, very thoughtful documentation procedure that I think can be universal to all the consultants. And the key is to follow documentation. We don't have it documented. You know, your changes are going to get confusing, but through proper documentation, you can follow along, and it'll be helpful to the regulatory agencies also, so they're not interpreting the changes, that they can just read exactly what that change is.
And I
Yeah,
think the
agreed.
big thing here is what you just gonna, consistency,
Yes.
that everybody's using it the same way, so it's not looking at an apple and an orange, we gotta look at every apple. So that's really the key part, is make sure we get it on the same form.
Good. Committee that's forming on documentation. Sam has a suggestion for documentation, put all really changed up in the heading of the model.
Well, that's what that's what the
Yeah.
committee's gonna come up with.
I think the committee's gonna do it.
Dr. Sam's gonna lead.
There's more detail than that to provide is what the typical upset process is, and I think we can bring that to that committee and share it.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I can share those documentation guidelines with the EMT. And you guys can either do a presentation on that or just share it with all the stakeholders using the NDS site.
And what I'd suggest, if you could do that, Sam, that'd be great. One of the tasks that's ongoing, very hot and heavy right now is developing the charter, the charge for the ad hoc committees. I don't want to get deep down into the weeds, into the modeling stuff today. But that's a good point that we could make a presentation from what that ad hoc committee meeting shows. And I think your documentation would be a good starting point for that ad hoc subcommittee That's the kickoff meeting.
Yeah, that would be perfect, because it's better than walking in cold and saying, hi. You know, we
Yeah.
kind of have this first document from you to say, okay, this is the suggested way. Does anybody have any other thoughts, or why your thought process? So thank you.
Yep,
And roll.
for sure. All right, we're gonna get back on this presentation. Okay. Wanted to mention one of the functions that I find useful with the Three Rivers rainfall tool is there's already pre-populated precipitation events going all the way back to the year 2000, I think. These, they're not going to be all encompassing. I think the way that they're determined by View and Associates, and they're based on 0.05 inches of precip registering at half of the rain gauges. So there could be instances where a storm rolled through only in the southern portion of Allegheny County and it didn't get picked up on here, but it's a good starting point. I'm going to push for Three Rivers to, maybe make this into a Excel file and add some statistics along with these precipitation events that I think could also be useful. So that's something maybe to come. Since last week, Christian at Civic Mapper was able to add some functionality on selecting by geography in this Three Rivers tool. I think last time we clicked on that, it said coming soon. And the way it works, and this is live and you can use it now, is when you go to geography, you can start typing in, or you can go down this extensive list of different basins, sewer sheds by municipality. And what it will do is it will grab those pixels in that area. Now, it doesn't aggregate the information as we talked with the View tool, and that we'll get into here shortly, but it'll give you the data for each one of those pixels right now to help you select. So that's some good functionality, and thanks for being quick with that, Christian. So getting into, actual data download, once you have either your pixel or your rain gauge selected, you have your time period selected, you hit get rainfall. Down on the bottom right, it'll pop up. It'll take a little bit of time depending on how much data you selected. You click view and download results table. And this is what you get. This is in table format. There's a graph function next to it that currently we don't have operating, but hopefully sometime soon we'll have that. You're downloading a CSV file if you're using the Three Rivers rainfall tool. And you can see under timestamp there, that kind of jumbled mess of numbers. This is how it downloads to you currently. I think this is something we'll work on to have different formats of getting the data. And just wanted to run through a quick, this is how we handle that jumbled mess of data to get it to something you can graph and things like that. You're basically selecting that time series, copying it out into another column. And then we're using text to columns in Excel to separate out these pieces of information. You're, using a fixed width and selecting how you want to split up that cell. You get it in this format. You delete the columns you don't need. And now you have a date and a time. And in column I, in this example, you're just adding those two together. It'll get you most likely in what you see in column K here. And you just need to format those cells to be your date and time. I know that was quick, but any questions on that? Okay. Okay, so another pop-up, it's the main pop-up when you get into Three Rivers tool. At the bottom, it'll say need something more powerful. And this gets into some upgraded analyses, things like that you can do with the precip data. And that's on the View site, and it's the Rain View VIP tool. If you need access to this, email Annie Quinn. She'll get you access and you'll be on your way. This is what the dashboard looks like. It's again, it's a map-based tool generally, so you're going to click on maps, and that'll take you to the Allegheny County pixels. There's a lot of different things you can do here. I would recommend going to that 3WG presentation to dig into it. You can add layers. You can change the way you're viewing the GARR data, whether it's by the pixels, you could have it in by sewer sheds. There's a lot of functionality here. This, for instance, is one storm that rolled through, and it gives you the results from the gauge adjusted radar rainfall throughout the county, tells you how many inches fell over that time period. Another way to view it is by the DDF grids, the depth, duration, frequency grids, which to me is synonymous with your return interval for a storm. You know, whether it's this was equivalent to a 1-year design storm, 2-year design storm, that kind of thing. I find this very useful, you know, especially you're not sure how hard a storm hit your specific municipality. To download the data, you go back to your dashboard, go to data downloads. Here's where you can select by pixel, by gauge. You can select by sewer shed. Your source selection there at the top is where you make your determination. Here's different ways you can select areas to download. And when you receive this information, you will get it aggregated. It will give you, if you select just one sewer shed, it's going to give you the weighted aggregated precip data over that entire sewer shed. And if you're looking at a specific meter, or maybe you're looking at 5 specific meters, you can just get precip for those specific RCS FMP meter sheds. That's what these sewer sheds are based on, these meter sheds. That's very helpful for modeling. And it helps to have different ways to look at this precipitation. You know, a lot of times, you know, maybe the gauge itself is the most accurate depiction of what you're looking at, but you can stack them up against each other and you can compare it to the flow data you've downloaded. You know, maybe in a certain instance, the rain gauge makes sense, but the pixel doesn't, and you'll have to work through that, but it gives you some options. This is what a download would look like. You have your source, you select by, you know, your times, you select time step, whether it's 5 minute, 15 minutes, hourly, a total for a day. And then you can select the format at the bottom right there of how it comes out. That's also very helpful depending on what program you're using.
What I'm saying here is really built on the cooperation, even before you start, because you could be, community A could be going down one path of what kind of data they're going to be gathering, and community B is going to be, so it's like somebody has to maybe take the lead and say, let's kind of use this type of data, because we all for nothing. A little bit I know about it, if you're starting to gather, so that's why the first conversation's got to start early. You know, who's going to make some suggestions? How are we going to do this? Because I just saw 4 different ways that we could gather data. So really, that's the communication part that has to happen.
One area that came up was in the baseline due diligence efforts when we were, you know, engineering firm A did their analysis on these meters and came up with, hey, here's what the contemporary value should be, you know, after I adjusted it back to 2008. And what we found in a lot of instances where things weren't matching up is, yeah, we did use different precip data, and that had a big impact. So that'll change your reduction or your factors, and it'll affect your final results. So
in summary, what we're saying is, going back to Julia's question earlier, is working multi-municipally
it is very key to be utilizing the same precipitation value and applying it in the right sewer shed. And having that dialogue. The key is settling on precipitation data as one of the first steps in that dialogue, and perhaps one of the most important steps.
Yeah.
And that's why we're focusing on rainfall data in its utility for all three meetings here in February, 3WG, separate sanitary sewer today, and then next week, the combined sewer subcommittee. Rainfall data, rainfall data, rainfall data. We have that fantastic luxury, that data set to be able to do that analysis. As one of the slides showed, there's 32 rain gauges that essentially simulates 2,300 rain gauges in terms of pixels. That can't be overstated enough.
And the rain gauges were just updated recently. There's another point I don't think I made earlier.
Good point of the investment that was made in bringing those to current technology. That's a very powerful tool. It's very important to settle on precipitation data early as your data point.
And I think what I'm thinking about in the separate system is you can't think, well, my meter's way up here. That's my control point. Well, yeah, but it's everybody down below you and everybody above. We all got to work together. Because if you just worry about your meter and not sharing anything, it just does not make the whole system correct. And we really built this mapping to do and the modeling, work together. And I tell you what, I haven't seen anybody that doesn't work together. So, sorry, Jake.
I know that's all good. This is what the downloads look like. Once you select the download, it'll pop up on this list, and then eventually you'll see a save icon on the left. That's how you click and download it.
Just the back, Three Rivers has created a site where you could do the share points so that we can make that available to you, so that for your particular POC or that joint venture, we could set up a site that you can load everything to and everybody can see the same data and it's easy for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not very pretty, but this is different outputs that you can get from the view site. And there's a small list here on the left, but that list is much larger. And, depending on what program you're using, it gives you that format.
Basically allows you to for different programs. Is that essentially what it is?
Yes, and not even, I guess, beyond even the different types of programs and I guess formats of it, it's actual file types. .tsf time series files or input files for swim, things like that. It's that was helpful. So now we're going to look at, how are we utilizing this precipitation data? And I started from scratch, and this is, as you're QA/QCing your flow data, even you're looking at it in comparison to the precipitation data. This is just an example of that. On the top row, we have our precipitation data, and then we have our velocity, depth, our flow. I think that's where you're starting to use this precipitation data. Following data QA/QC, I think in most cases, we're going to be bringing this data into EPA SOAP to do storm deconstructions on the data. Yes. Was missing one thing. What? I don't have it in here. Go back. I apologize. I wanted to specifically mention that I think as far as utilizing this precipitation data and going back to this part of the view tool, single event characterization is, I think, a very powerful way to utilize this precip, and I think that's the first simplest way to use it.
Those, yeah, those two. For those, is any storm?
Let me see. Yes.
I completely agree. This, you know, you look at this and that, and you're looking, okay, Bridgeville, you got hammered on. But if you go to the next one with the design source, that's way more telling. Because now you're saying, wait a minute, what happened in Brentwood? What happened in Carrick? What happened, you know, in Castle Shannon? Those areas may not have gotten a lot of volume, but the density of those storms needs to really be taken into account.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's what makes this view so powerful.
Everybody here too.
I think so. I think that came through pretty clear. Yeah.
Thank you. That's,
Damn. Yeah.
So as far as loading into SOAP, I provided some slides that just, show how the process worked generally on our end, and you're setting up Excel files outside of the SOAP program before you load it in. If you're not familiar with the program, there's a lot of guidance on it. I think there's guidance on MDS on how we utilize this program that would be of value to you. Not going to go into all those details, but probably in the specific examples next month, we'll dig in a little further. Just going to zoom through these. Just examples of how we're loading the precip and then getting to the point where now we're going to do hydrograph deconstructions.
So teaching us for next month.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
But now you're starting to split this in double. Now you're starting to take that data you have and putting it into the SOAP
Yes.
system.
Yeah, and this is what we're using to break up our flow data into base wastewater flow, GWI, and RDII. That we will eventually use for modeling, for heat map analysis, for QP tool. All that requires some effort or level of storm deconstruction.
So you have click and drag, so it's pretty easy to bring the information, click and drag the graph.
Yeah, that's how you select storms. Further in SOAP, you can start into RTK analysis. And this is our initial step towards calibrating a model. There's a lot that goes into that, but you're utilizing the precip data for that as well. And even your storm selections, storms you want to use for your calibrations, things like that are highly dependent on the precip data. After SOAP, for most of us, we're moving into SWIM after that. And here's a few slides just on loading that precipitation data into SWIM. Again, you can get direct output from the view tool that is a input file for SWIM. I have PC SWIM up here, but that's all SWIM programs.
That's the one Sam talked about last week.
Yeah, that's that part of the benefit of the view tool is to be able to download the different formats.
It automatically, you don't have to do all the manual, it just automatically goes up.
The versions from the state, our POC model sharing the version, we can name that version soon. Evaluation.
Yes.
The question was, there's many different versions of SWIM you can use, and the version we're using is important. The submodels that were distributed by Three Rivers, that SWIM model version needs to be maintained. Is that okay? That's the answer is yes.
Yeah.
As of yesterday, the PM team had a request from an engineer whose computer crashed and they didn't have access, and that version of SWIM is not easy to find. So we have the downloader tool now on MDS. So if you're looking for the specific type of SWIM that's necessary to run the models, I even put it in like 5 places on MDS.
So
It's all over.
and that's the EPA version
Yeah.
of SWIM.
Yeah, that's the EPA version of SWIM. And so it's there when you click on it, it will start the process.
Here's what I think we'll do. We'll send out a general email to everybody to say that this is the swim, version you need to use, and it is at the MDS site. So that we're not, so maybe Andy can point like a little snapshot. So we'll send it out because that was actually my note because it came up in one of our meetings the other day. And I was just asking Jason that we need to mention that because what I'm told from Bradbury, it's very critical that you use that same one because you'll get all different data.
Every time you change the version, you'll get slightly different answers. So same type of thing with collaboration to make sure that everyone's using the same thing for consistency. It's good to keep to that.
So we'll watch for a global email. I think that's just a way that everybody will have.
Yeah, it's like, when your iPhone keeps reminding you to update the operating system or iOS. And some people just update it right away and then they find out that some of their other apps are not working properly. So, when they say like, don't fix if it ain't broken, that is so true in Swim. Okay, there are 2 newer versions of Swim. We recommend 5.1.012. There is 0.014 and 0.015 and most recently 5.2. Do not use these newer versions because you will get different overflow volumes. That means you will get different person captures.
Are the overflow volumes going down?
I knew where you were going.
One of the challenges with the new versions is they usually are trying to fix certain things. But the challenge is quite often when they fix one thing, sometimes they create other problems. And that's where typically where Alcoa has gone and to use a new version, there's been a detailed analysis to understand the changes that are within that model to confirm that it is a better representation. And once that's been validated, that's when they'll jump to a newer version to keep up with those updates. But often what you'll find is some places they may go up, some places they may go down. So it's trying to understand why there are the changes in the first place.
Go ahead. He has a very good question. Yeah.
Why is that? The swim models changed.
Because they're changing, I mean, they're always fixing or adding things to add additional detail. And whenever you change the numerical method that's being used for the calculation. It's
So once you say that they're fixing it, then how about the model will be? Correct.
That is the intent. But as we've all seen, when you go buy a new car, it's the first year it's out in service. It's being sold because it's the brand new one and the better one, but quite often after it's used for 2 years, it's, oh, wait a minute, we need to make changes on our transmission or our engine to address certain things. That's the same thing we see with these versions.
Another way to look at it is that's the version you calibrated to.
Right.
So all your rainfall data, all your flow monitoring data, you tweak that particular version, make sure. Well, so once you go to another version, unless you're gonna calibrate again to that.
Yeah, we're good.
That's a calibration.
Yeah.
I think they've been using, each time you update it, each time you update, you have to
But that-
go through that.
Think about it, it was the
it.
previous version, but
Yeah.
again, it goes back to validating the new version and what impacts does that have on the system to make sure we're comfortable that it still is hitting those prior calibrations. So it's understanding that and making sure we understand all the changes that are within there. And like I said, I've seen many times where, yes, they fixed one thing. And as part of that, they created some problems elsewhere that they fixed in the next version. So that's why we're very cautious of not just always, if there's a new version, just use it blindly. We go through a very systematic approach to evaluating the version, to understand the impacts of it before we'll institute that.
What is the Alcoa schedule for consideration of use? Like, so is it like a 5 years out, we might be shifting, or like, what does that look like even just to keep, I don't know. Is there that type of philosophy, like, oh, every 3 years we're reevaluating which model we're using, or?
Yeah, I was just talking to Brad this morning about it, because if it was up to me, I would say let everybody start using version 5.2, which is the latest. Okay, and, you know, Khalid, who was asking the question earlier, he's our lead guy, to analyze. What we do is, there's so much work behind it. We run the model using the new version and compare the results of the new model with the old one. Okay, and we compare the results of typical year model for the whole system. That's a lot of work, but we also do it for design storms and so on. We also compare the overflow volumes, because that is our compliance. You know, we don't want them to be changed that much, otherwise we will have to explain to agencies that why our overflows are different, you know? So, to answer Annie's question, you know, it is on our radar, you know, on average, probably, you know, 3 to 5 years is when, we go with a new version, provided that it meets our criteria. And we wait for that, you know, right moment to switch. So, you know, we did planning for 10 years. Now we are in the design phase. The first change that we made in our version is when we started the design of ORT in treatment plant about 3 years ago. So, you know, as I said, it's working, you know, why change it? But at some point in time, you know, you don't have that option, because you start to become incompatible, you know, with the devices, printers, and so on. You're kind of forced to make a change. So, usually it's that time when we make the switch.
So to summarize the model versioning from the self-appointed mental health coordinator of 3WG and SSS and CSS, speaking from experience, if you don't want to drive yourself nuts, use the versions that are being prescribed.
Yeah.
Because you run different versions, you'll get different numbers, and you'll get wrapped around the axle and try to figure it out. Save yourself the conundrums. Use the versions that Three Rivers was able to bring back for the municipalities, the EPA version or PC swing. Use those versions, will give you some level sense of sanity over and above the alternative analysis that you're going to have to go through in terms of source flow reduction. Take that little piece of swim versioning out of the equation, use the prescribed swim versions. It'll save you a little bit of sanity anyway.
Right, and make sure you get back to office have all the changes, so someday when they do the change, they can bring everything into the fold. And then 10 years from now, whatever, then say, okay, this is what we move to, but then everybody moves. So, but the key thing with this is, this engineer had computer problems and everything was like, poof, it went away. So, then he couldn't find it. So we thought this would be great. So it's archived right there. And it is just key. So,
And I speak from experience in that versioning, from the perspective, doing a whole lot of analysis, comfortable where you're at, upgrade to the newest version of Swims, you lose everything. Because there's a bug in the executable file that it took 6 to 8 months for EPA to fix.
so it's out there.
Shame on me for that, but I'm speaking from experience. Utilize the versions that we're prescribing here in a uniform manner, and will be just fine.
Hey, Jake.
Okay. So that was swim. Just another tool, you know, it's maybe a little bit out of order, but you know, once we get into doing these projects and doing post-construction flow monitoring, or even the the pre-construction flow monitoring you might be doing right now, you'll be utilizing the QP tool. And this also, as we mentioned already, heavily dependent on the precipitation data. And on a multi-municipal level, you want to be using the same preset. Here's just some slides on loading into the QP tool and where you load it. So kind of in summary, this is the phase 2 consent order task list, as I see it, for separate sanitary communities. All of these incorporating precipitation data. So hopefully you're out there now doing your flow monitoring, your flow isolation, your field surveys to update your model. You've got to QA, QC all that data. You're deconstructing that data, RTK analysis on contemporary data that you may use to update or, validate your model. You're updating the physical portions of the model, maybe, manholes, information's changed, or there's been parallel line installations, I don't know, something like that, that you need to incorporate into the H&H model, and then updating your calibration or just validating what's currently there. Using it for SSO characterizations, the type and the frequency, moving to alternatives analysis, planning for a 10% project, evaluating SSOs to see how are you going to eliminate this SSO, looking at different alternatives there, and then on to post-construction flow monitoring and using the QP tool and getting some adjustments to get you back to 2008. Yeah, just to repeat, yeah, it's equally important to document the physical changes we're making to the model. And I think that'll all be part of the guidance that Khalid was mentioning, and, even utilizing the correct version of SWIM, picking the same dates for design storm runs. I think we've already established that guidance. It'll be important that we're all doing the same thing there. So now, this is my last slide, just a reminder on these ad hoc committees. The ones in red, I believe, are the ones that deal specifically on the separate sanitary end. I don't have, an update of where we're at and who's been selected.
We will be announcing that. So we've got a lot of people, Alpha Santa's give us their team members. We've got other people who have volunteered. And Jason and I are working on a schedule that we're putting together when we're going to start these meetings. So it'll be soon.
Okay.
Anything else? Not too late to volunteer. So all I would like to say is, what I keep learning here is that we are very fortunate in this area to have this type of a rain gauge system that is so robust and whatever. And it was created how many years ago by Three Rivers, 20 some years ago. But I'd be remiss in saying that I want to, we all thank Alpha Santa for providing the funding for us to upgrade the system. Over the last year and a half, it's been an arduous task, and Tim's team does a great job on maintaining them, so that, be assured that they are always looked at and they're calibrated. And when something goes down, we get a report every morning on what happened, and so it is very robust. You're crazy if you don't utilize it. And I think the key thing here is what we've been talking about for years and hitting more home with these orders. You gotta communicate with your neighbor and you gotta work together. It just helps you in the long run, and it helps the region. And guess what? It will help in the next set of orders. I think that the agencies, from what the feedback that I'm getting is, they are really excited about the cooperation between multi-municipal. The transfer of the trunk lines is, I've been a proponent of that for 20 years.
You know, and so I think that, we are really showing the agencies that the region's coming together. Some of the territorial stuff has been put aside. I think some communities are going like, I got rid of that trunk line. I don't have to worry about that anymore. You know, Julie and Tim and them don't have to worry about that. And, so, but you know, it's good for the region. It's good for, you know, look, we're not kidding each other. There will be another set of orders. And the biggest part is what we talk about is this gold line standard, whatever, you know, the tighter we keep that sponge, it's going to get harder. So, thanks for everybody for coming. We'll see the combined SOAR communities in the next week. Also, not too long from now, we'll be sending out a reminder about the conference that's in November and a call for papers. So, you know, there's many of you in this room that have great ideas that can be shared with everybody else. So think about that. You don't have to be one as before. If you got a good idea, send it in to us. We'll look at it. So thanks, everybody.